what truckers stumble across in the Appalachian Mountains that makes them question reality itself? Some of the things I'm about to share, well, you won't believe they're true. Creepy sightings, strange encounters, and moments that make you wish the road was empty. If you're ready to feel a chill down your spine, hit subscribe, drop a like, and share this with someone who loves a good scare. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Buckle up. This is going to get unsettling. I'd been running the Blue Ridge Parkway later than I should have, pushing hours because the night was clear and the road was empty in that rare way it only gets midweek, long after tourist season fades. The mountains were just black shapes against a darker sky, the kind of dark that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on the windshield. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the trees, and beyond that, there was nothing. No houses, no radio signal, no cell service. Just the steady hum of tires and the low rattle in my dash I'd been meaning to fix for months. It was peaceful in a lonely way, the kind that lets your mind wander too far. I saw her right after a curve, standing at milepost 289 like she'd been waiting there a long time. The white dress caught the headlights first, glowing faintly, plastered to her legs from the rain that had passed through earlier. She was barefoot, toes red and muddy, hair hanging in dark, wet strands around her face. I slowed without thinking, heart kicking up in my chest. You don't expect to see anyone walking that stretch at night, let alone someone dressed like that. She didn't wave or step back. She just stood there, eyes fixed on the road, like she wasn't sure if I was real yet. When I rolled the window down, the cold rushed in. She leaned closer, and I could see her eyes were open wide but unfocused, like she was looking through me instead of at me. Her lips moved slowly, carefully. She asked if I could give her a ride, said it was just up ahead. Her voice trembled, not like she was scared of me, but like she was cold down to the bone. I hesitated longer than I should have. Every instinct told me this was wrong. No phone, no bag, no jacket, but leaving her there felt worse. So I reached over and unlocked the door. The moment she climbed in, the cab felt different. Not colder exactly, but heavier, like the air had thickened. The smell of wet fabric and something earthy filled the space, like creek water and old leaves. I turned the heater up, watched the fan spin faster, but the air coming out stayed cold. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap, staring forward. I tried to make small talk, asked where she'd come from if she was hurt. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper, and she gave me directions that didn't sound like any road I knew. A few miles up, she pointed toward a narrow turnoff, dropping into a hollow, barely marked, swallowed by trees. I slowed, unsure. That road looked like it hadn't been used in years, more dirt than pavement, disappearing fast into shadow. She leaned closer to the windshield and whispered an address. Numbers and a name I didn't recognize. As she spoke, the radio crackled once, sharp and sudden, then went dead. I felt a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake, a sense that I was crossing some line I wouldn't be able to uncross. I glanced at her, meaning to tell her I couldn't go that way, that I'd take her to the next ranger station instead. That's when I realized she wasn't breathing. Her chest didn't rise. Her hands didn't move. For a second, my mind refused to accept it. I blinked hard, looked back at the road, then back again. The seat beside me was empty. I swerved slightly, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. The passenger door was still closed. The seatbelt hung loose, dry. No dampness, no imprint, no warmth. Just an empty seat and that lingering cold, crawling along my arm. I I pulled over, hands shaking, and got out, scanning the roadside with my flashlight. The beam caught wet leaves, rocks, the milepost behind me. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone having been there at all. I stood there longer than I care to admit, listening to the forest. It wasn't quiet in the normal way. It was muted, like everything was holding its breath. No insects, no wind, just the distant drip of water somewhere down the slope. Eventually I got back in, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't take the turnoff she'd pointed to. I didn't slow down again until I hit a gas station an hour later, lights blazing like a promise. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Fatigue, stress, a trick of the light. But the cold didn't leave right away. Even after I parked and shut the engine off, it clung to the cab, settled into the upholstery like it belonged there. I slept poorly that night, dreaming of headlights cutting through fog and a voice whispering directions I couldn't follow. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I asked around at a diner near the parkway, careful how I phrased it. An older waitress stiffened when I mentioned milepost 289. She set my coffee down harder than necessary and told me some folks don't make it home from those roads, especially at night. Said there'd been an accident years back. A young woman, car went off the road into a ravine during a storm. They never found her right away. By the time they did, the rain had washed everything clean. I stopped asking after that. I avoided that stretch when I could. Took longer routes, even if it meant less sleep. But every now and then, late at night, when the mountains close in and the road goes quiet, I feel that same heaviness settle around me. Sometimes the heater blows cold no matter how high I turn it. Sometimes the radio crackles once, sharp and sudden, like someone trying to get my attention. I still don't know what I picked up that night. I don't know why she chose my truck, or why she left without a word. All I know is that when I pass milepost 289 now, I keep my eyes straight ahead. I don't slow down, and I never, ever unlock the door. But even then, I can't shake the feeling that something is still riding with me, quiet and patient, waiting for me to miss a turn. It was just past midnight when the tunnel took me. That stretch of road in West Virginia doesn't have a name on most maps. Just a curved scar through the mountains where Route 33 dips and disappears like it's ashamed of where it's going. Rain had been falling steady for hours, not hard, just enough to smear the world into gray streaks under my headlights. The kind of rain that makes you feel alone even when you know towns aren't far off. I remember checking my dash clock right before the tunnel mouth rose out of the fog. 12:07 a.m. I remember because I'd been counting minutes, trying to stay sharp. The tunnels swallowed my headlights whole. No gradual dark, no easing into it. 1 second I could see wet asphalt stretching ahead. The next it was like someone threw a blanket over the world. Then the engine cut out. No sputter, no cough. Just silence so sudden my foot jerked off the pedal like I'd been burned. The cab lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to a weak amber glow, like candles at a wake. My radio hissed and died. The windshield wipers froze mid-swipe. Outside, the rain stopped. Not slowed, stopped. I sat there, gripping the wheel, listening to my own breathing echo too loud in the cab. Tunnels always carry sound, but this one felt wrong. Too dead. No dripping water. No hum of distant traffic. No wind. Just quiet so thick it pressed against my ears. After a minute that felt like 10, I told myself it was just electrical trouble. Old truck. Wet night. Nothing more. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down onto the pavement. The air hit me like I'd walked into a cellar. Cold and stale, with a faint sour smell I couldn't place at first. The tunnel walls were close, closer than they should have been. Rough stone sweating moisture that didn't drip. My boots made no echo when I walked. The beam of my flashlight seemed to die a few yards out, swallowed by mist that hadn't been there before. That's when I heard it. Not a voice exactly, more like breath shaped into sound. Slow, careful. It came from somewhere ahead of me, deeper in the tunnel, curling through the fog. Ars. I froze. My name shouldn't have been there. I hadn't told anyone my route that night. I hadn't keyed the mic in hours. The sound came again, closer this time, drawn out like it was being tasted. Arslan. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It knew I was listening. My skin prickled so hard it hurt, and every instinct I had told me to get back in the cab. I backed up without turning around, flashlight shaking in my hand. I told myself it was wind, air moving through cracks, the mind filling in gaps. But wind doesn't pause between syllables. When my heel hit the step, I scrambled into the cab and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the mirrors. The whisper stopped. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I sat there with my hand on the ignition, afraid to turn it, afraid not to. When I finally did, the engine coughed once and came back to life like nothing had ever been wrong. Headlights flared, bright and normal. Dash lights steady. Radio crackling with distant static. I let out a laugh that sounded wrong even to me. I checked the clock. 4:19 a.m. 4 hours gone. No memory of them, no missed calls, no alarms. My logbook jumped from 12:07 straight to after 4. I drove out of that tunnel without looking back, hands numb on the wheel, telling myself time slips happen when you're tired. It wasn't until dawn, pulled over at a rest stop, that I noticed the hammer. It sat on the passenger seat like it had always belonged there. Cold iron head, dark wood handle wrapped with leather that smelled old and damp. Symbols were etched along the metal, shallow but deliberate. Lines and hooks and shapes that made my eyes slide away when I tried to focus on them. It was heavier than it looked. When I picked it up, a chill crawled up my arm and settled behind my eyes. I should have left it. I know that now. But something about it felt important, like losing it would be worse. So I wrapped it in a towel and put it in my sleeper. For weeks after, things were mostly normal. Mostly. I started noticing sounds at night when I parked. Slow footsteps outside the cab, fingertips brushing along metal. Breathing close enough to fog the glass, though nothing was ever there when I looked. I stopped sleeping well. Every dream ended with that tunnel, stretching longer each time, walls closing in, my name whispered from a dozen mouths. The hammer began to show up where I hadn't left it. On the dash, on the floor by my boots, once balanced upright on the table at a roadside diner I didn't remember stopping at. When I asked the waitress how long I'd been sitting there, she looked at me like I was joking and said I'd just walked in. It wasn't until late October that I went back through those mountains. I tried to reroute, but dispatch insisted. Said there was no tunnel where I described. I checked maps, satellite images. Nothing. Just forest and old mining roads and a thin gray line of highway bending around a ridge. The rain came back that night, gentle and relentless. Midnight passed. The road dipped. Fog thickened. And there it was, stone mouth rising out of the dark like it had been waiting. This time, I didn't stop. I hit the gas. The tunnel took my lights again, but the engine stayed on. The whisper came from all sides now, layered and patient, calling my name the way family does when they want you to come home. Shapes moved in the fog. Thin figures hugging the walls, skin the color of wet stone, eyes reflecting light too well. They didn't rush me. They watched. I realized then the hammer was warm in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up. Symbols along its head seemed deeper now, dark with something that wasn't rust. The truck burst out the far side of the tunnel into night air and rain and sound, and I didn't stop driving until sunrise burned the fog away. I threw the hammer into a river outside a town whose name I never caught. It sank without a ripple. I still hear them sometimes, in heavy mist, in quiet places. My name carried on slow breath, never urgent, yet never angry. Just waiting. And every now and then, I'll wake up with the cold shape of a hammer pressed into my palm and 4 hours missing from the clock. I'd heard the whispers about strange lights near Brown Mountain my whole life, the way you hear about things when you grow up anywhere near the Appalachians. Old men at gas stations would lower their voices. Park rangers would smile tight and change the subject. Folks called them the Brown Mountain Lights and laughed them off as swamp gas, reflections, drunk tourists with flashlights. I laughed too, because laughing was easier than admitting that sometimes, late at night, you'd see things out here that didn't care whether you believed in them or not. That night, I was hauling freight through western North Carolina, pushing hard because I'd already lost time to a blown tire near Asheville. My logbook was tight, and I was trying to make the next way station before dawn so I could shut down and sleep. The road had thinned out to almost nothing, just a ribbon of asphalt cutting through black timber and rolling fog. No radio signal, no cell bars, just the hum of the engine and the steady white lines slipping under my headlights. It was one of those stretches where the forest presses close, like it's leaning in to listen. I noticed the first light just past a long downhill curve. It was amber, warm, almost comforting, floating just off the right shoulder. At first I thought it was a reflector or maybe a lantern hung on a fence post, but there was no fence, no driveway, no reason for anyone to be standing out there at 2 in the morning. The light moved with me, not fast, not slow, just gliding along parallel to the truck. It didn't bounce or shake like a flashlight would. It just hovered. I told myself it was nothing. Fatigue does things to your eyes, especially when you've been staring into darkness for hours. Then another light appeared on the left side of the road, matching the first one perfectly. Same color, same height, same smooth motion. They looked like lanterns being carried by people walking just inside the tree line, but there were no silhouettes, no sound of footsteps, no crunch of leaves. Just those two steady glows pacing me. The unease crept in slow, like cold seeping through boots. I cracked the window, half expecting to hear voices or laughter, some sign of normal human foolishness. All I got was the smell of wet earth and pine, heavy and old, and a faint sound I couldn't place. Not quite wind, not quite animals. More like breathing, but stretched thin and distant. A mile later, a third light appeared ahead of me, floating above the road itself. I eased off the throttle without meaning to, my foot hovering as my brain tried to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Headlights don't float. Drones blink. Lanterns swing. This thing just waited there, steady and patient, until I rolled beneath it. As I passed, it slid sideways, settling into position alongside the others, like it had been practicing the move for a long time. That's when I remembered Brown Mountain and all the stories people told with a nervous grin. Lost miners, ghosts, ball lightning. None of those explanations felt big enough for what I was seeing. These lights weren't random, they were aware. I could feel it in the way they adjusted when I changed speed, the way they stayed just outside the beam of my headlights, never fully illuminated, never fully gone. I rubbed my eyes hard, blinked twice, and focused on the road. When I looked again, the lights were closer. Not by much, just enough that I could see the faint halo around them, like heat shimmer. My heart started to hammer, and I told myself not to panic. Panic gets people killed out here. You miss a curve, drift too far right, and the mountain takes you. The radio crackled then, bursting to life with static so loud I flinched. I reached for the volume knob, but the noise cut out on its own, replaced by a low murmur. It sounded almost like voices overlapping, too many to separate, too soft to understand. I slammed the radio off, the sudden silence ringing in my ears. That was when the light on the right dipped toward my side mirror. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed to keep my eyes forward, to pretend none of this was happening. But curiosity and fear have a way of twisting together, and before I could stop myself, I glanced at the mirror. What I saw there wasn't the forest I'd been driving through. The trees were wrong, thicker, taller, their branches tangled together so tightly they blotted out the sky entirely. The darkness behind them wasn't night, it was something heavier, like the absence of anything human. Standing just inside that wall of timber were two figures. They didn't move, they didn't wave or step forward. They just stood there, side by side, watching. Even in the warped reflection, I could tell they were too thin, their limbs hanging at angles that didn't look natural. Their faces were pale smudges, eyes dark and deep, catching the amber light and reflecting it back faintly, like animals caught in headlights. I jerked my gaze back to the road, my breath coming fast and shallow. The mirror showed normal forest again when I dared to check a second later, but the feeling didn't leave. The sense of being observed pressed down on me until my shoulders ached. The lights drifted closer, still almost brushing the side of the trailer. I could see the faint reflection of them in the polished metal, stretched and distorted. One by one, they began to rise, lifting up and back, floating toward the treetops. For a brief, terrible moment, I felt relief. Then the road dipped sharply, and all at once the lights vanished. The darkness that replaced them felt wrong, too complete. The sounds of the forest faded, leaving only the engine and my own heartbeat. I checked the mirrors constantly, expecting them to reappear, but the miles rolled by empty and silent. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I drove like something was chasing me, even though nothing was there. When the way station finally came into view, its harsh white lights felt like salvation. I pulled in shaking, my hands numb on the wheel, and shut the engine off. Inside the cab, the silence was unbearable. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it all. Fatigue, stress, mountain tricks. Eventually, I climbed down and walked around the truck, checking tires I knew were fine, needing to see something solid and normal. That's when I noticed the mud on the trailer. It was smeared along the lower panels, dark and thick, like something had brushed against it. The smell hit me next, rank, sour, nothing like the clean mountain earth I knew. Embedded in the grime were prints, handprints, long fingers pressed deep into the metal, too narrow, too many joints showing through. I didn't file a report. I didn't tell the way station officer anything beyond a long drive. I finished my route and took a week off after that, telling myself I just needed rest. But even now, years later, I avoid that stretch of road. And sometimes, late at night, when I catch a faint amber glow in my side mirror, I don't look. Because I know there are parts of those mountains that never moved on, places where the forest watches the road, waiting for someone tired enough, lonely enough to finally stop and ask what's out there. I'd been hauling freight through eastern Kentucky long enough to know when a place didn't want you there. The road that night was one of those state routes that narrows without warning, the kind where the tree line creeps close enough to scrape your mirrors and the mountains feel like they're leaning in to listen. My logbook said I still had hours before I needed to shut down, but my eyes were burning and my shoulders ached from fighting the curves. When I saw the truck stop, I almost passed it by. It sat back off the road, half hidden behind a line of pines, a faded sign swinging in the breeze like it had forgotten its own name. I'd never seen it before, and I checked my routes religiously. Every map I'd ever used showed nothing there. Still, the lights were on, and in those hills, light feels like a promise. The asphalt crunched under my tires as I pulled in, weeds poking through the cracks like fingers. The place looked abandoned, but not the way buildings usually do when they've been left alone. The pumps were rusted, paint blistered and peeling, but the fluorescent lights overhead hummed low and steady, casting that sickly yellow glow that makes everything look tired. The diner attached to it had chairs stacked upside down on the tables, like someone had closed for the night and never come back. My engine ticked as it cooled, loud in the quiet. No other trucks, no cars, no movement, just the lights and the hum and the cicadas screaming from the tree line like they were trying to drown out something else. I sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, listening. You learn to do that out on the road. Places talk if you give them time. I didn't hear voices or laughter or the clink of dishes. I didn't hear wind through the trees either. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, even though the sky was clear. I told myself I was just tired. I shut down the engine, grabbed my jacket, and climbed out. The smell hit me first. Old grease, damp earth, and something sour underneath, like meat left too long in the sun. I took a few steps toward the diner door when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, metal on gravel. Not the quick scuff of someone walking, but a dragging sound, like whatever was making it didn't care how much noise it made. It circled my rig, staying just out of sight. The sound shifting from my left to my right, back and forth, never stopping. I called out without thinking, a simple hello that sounded thin and foolish as soon as it left my mouth. The footsteps didn't answer. They just kept going, steady as a clock. I stood there, frozen, staring at the space between the pumps. The light didn't reach all the way to the edges, and the shadows pooled thick and dark, stretching and bending in ways that made my eyes ache. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel them. That's the only way I can describe it. Like being watched by something that didn't need eyes. My heart started to hammer, and I backed toward the cab, never turning my back on the sound. The steps slowed, matching me, always keeping the same distance. When I reached the door, I grabbed the handle and pulled it open just enough to peek out. The light from inside the cab spilled onto the gravel, and that's when I saw the shadows move. Long, thin shapes slid between the pumps, stretching far past where any body should be. They bent at wrong angles, splitting and rejoining like reflections in broken glass. I waited for something solid to step into view. A man, a dog, anything, but nothing did. The footsteps stopped, and the silence that followed felt worse than the noise. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so bad I dropped my keys. I sat there, breathing hard, telling myself it was a trick of the light, fatigue playing games. That's when the radio crackled. I hadn't turned it on. Static poured out, loud enough to make me flinch, the needle on the dial jumping on its own. I reached to shut it off, but before I could, the static faded, and a voice came through, clear and calm, like it was sitting right beside me. It said my home address. Not just the town or the street, the whole thing. Number, street name, even the little rural route designation I'd had to explain to more than one delivery driver. The voice was a man's, low and even, with a slight drawl that fit the hills outside too well. It didn't sound threatening. That somehow made it worse. I felt my stomach drop, cold spreading through me like I'd swallowed ice water. I slapped the radio off, but the last few words lingered in the air, echoing in my head. The footsteps started again, faster now, circling the truck with more urgency. I could hear more than one set this time, overlapping, out of sync. Something brushed the side of the cab, a soft scrape that made me jolt. I didn't wait to see more. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, the sound almost painful in the quiet. As I threw it into gear, the radio clicked back on by itself. Static, then the voice again, closer somehow, whispering my name. I hit the gas hard enough to spin gravel, the rig lurching forward. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the place in my mirrors. The lights flickered, and for just a second, I thought I saw shapes standing at the edge of the lot, where the forest began. Not shadows this time, but figures, too tall, too thin, their arms hanging wrong. They didn't chase me. They just watched, heads tilted, as if curious. I didn't stop driving until dawn. I left my dinner sitting on the table in the cab, untouched, my coffee sloshed cold over the rim. Every mile put distance between me and that truck stop, but the feeling followed me, a tight knot between my shoulders that refused to loosen. When I finally pulled into a rest area, I knew by heart, crowded with other trucks and lit up like a small city, I still checked my mirrors before I climbed out. I still listened for footsteps. I told a few guys about it later, laughed it off like a bad dream. One old-timer got quiet when I mentioned the road. He said there were places in those mountains that didn't show up on maps because they didn't stay put. Places where people went missing back when the mines closed and never really left. Feral folks, he called them, living off what they could take, watching the roads like streams of metal prey. He said sometimes they learned things. Names, addresses, the sound of a voice over the radio. I haven't hauled through that stretch since. Every now and then, though, when I'm alone in the cab and the night presses in close, my radio will crackle with static for no reason. I keep it off now, but I can still hear that voice in my head, calm and certain, like it knows I'm listening. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I hear footsteps outside, slow and purposeful, circling, waiting for me to crack the door. It happened near the Smoky Mountain stretch at 2:47 in the morning, and I remember the time because I checked it 3 times afterward, hoping the numbers would change and tell me it wasn't real. I was hauling refrigerated freight southbound, the kind of drive where the road feels endless and the trees lean in close like they're listening. The fog had settled low, not thick enough to blind you, just enough to swallow the shoulders and make the forest feel closer than it should have been. I'd been awake too long, running on bad coffee and worse thoughts, but I wasn't tired enough to imagine what came next. CB Channel 19 had been alive all night. Truckers swapping lies, warning about speed traps, complaining about dispatch. It was comforting noise, the kind you don't realize you need until it's gone. Somewhere past mile marker, I can't remember anymore, the chatter just stopped, not faded, not turned to static. It was like someone cut the sound with a knife. The radio didn't hiss or crackle. It went dead silent. Even the background hum vanished. I turned the volume knob, thinking something had shorted, but the silence stayed heavy and wrong, pressing against my ears. That silence did something to me. It wasn't peaceful. It felt like when you hold your breath underwater too long and your chest starts to panic on its own. I tapped the mic and called out, just to hear my own voice. Breaker 19, anyone got eyes on traffic ahead? My words went out into nothing. No echo, no reply. The forest outside seemed to lean closer, the road narrowing in my headlights, trees rising like dark walls on both sides. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then the radio crackled once, sharp enough to make me flinch. A voice came through, low and dragged out, every word placed carefully, like it was savoring them. It said my call sign, not rushed, not clipped like normal CB talk. Slow, deliberate, like it was tasting it. Hearing my call sign come back at me from that silence made my stomach drop. I asked who it was. Tried to keep my voice steady, but it shook anyway. "Yeah, who's that? You got a copy on me?" There was a pause. Then the voice came back, closer somehow, though I knew that didn't make sense. It started describing my cab, not general stuff. Specific things nobody should have known. The old coffee stain on my logbook shaped like a crescent moon. The tear in my seatbelt near the latch, where it rubbed my jacket every mile. My hands went cold on the wheel. I hadn't told anyone about that tear. I barely noticed it myself most days. The voice spoke calmly, almost gently, like it was reading from a list. I told myself it had to be another driver messing with me. Maybe someone parked nearby with binoculars and too much time. But we were miles from any rest area. No pull-offs, no lights, just forest and fog and road. I leaned forward, peering into the mirrors, scanning the darkness behind me. Nothing but my own trailer lights stretching back into black. I demanded to know where they were. The voice didn't answer. Instead, it kept talking, moving on to things it couldn't possibly see. The scuffed rubber mat under my pedals, the dent in the dash from when I dropped my flashlight, the smell of burnt coffee and old vinyl. Each detail felt like a hand pressing against my chest, pushing the air out. I realized I was gripping the wheel hard enough to hurt. Then the static swelled suddenly, loud and angry, like the radio was choking. The voice cut out mid-sentence. I waited, heart hammering, staring at the empty road ahead. For a few seconds, there was nothing but my engine and my own breathing. I almost convinced myself it was over. That's when I heard the whisper. It didn't come from the radio. It came from behind me, inside the cab. Soft, close. So close, I felt warm breath brush the skin behind my ear. It said my name, not my call sign, my real name, the one I don't use on the road. My foot slammed the brake without thinking, tires screaming, trailer shuddering behind me. The truck lurched to a stop in the middle of the highway, hazards flashing uselessly into the fog. I spun around, flashlight in hand, sweeping the sleeper, empty. The bunk was undisturbed, curtains still tied back. No footprints, no movement. My breath came fast and loud, fogging the glass. I checked the locks twice, hands shaking so badly I fumbled the keys. Everything was secure. There was nowhere anyone could have hidden without me noticing. When I turned back, the radio was alive again. Channel 19 buzzed with normal static. A driver laughed about missing an exit. Someone complained about Tennessee drivers. I slammed the mic button and shouted, asking if anyone had just been talking to me. The replies came quick and confused. Nobody had heard my call sign. Nobody had described my cab. A couple guys joked that I needed sleep. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. I pulled back onto the road, heart still racing, eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds. The forest felt closer now, darker. Shapes moved at the edge of my headlights that vanished when I looked straight at them. I told myself it was deer, or shadows, or exhaustion. 10 miles later, I saw a cabin. It sat just off the road, barely visible through the trees, no lights on, porch sagging like it was tired of standing. I don't remember seeing cabins there before, and I'd driven that road plenty of times. Something about it made my skin crawl. The truck slowed without me meaning it to. As I passed, my headlights swept across the porch, and for a split second, I saw movement. Figures, thin, too still, standing shoulder to shoulder in the shadows, watching the road. I hit the gas, heart pounding, telling myself not to look back, but I did anyway. In the mirror, I saw them step forward into the light, faces pale and wrong, mouths hanging open like they'd forgotten how to close them. They didn't chase. They just watched as I sped away, their shapes swallowed by fog and trees. The radio crackled again, but this time no one spoke. Just breathing. Slow. Wet. Like someone with their mouth too close to the mic. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping my seatbelt, feeling that tear rub against my jacket like it always did. The breathing stopped as suddenly as it started. By the time I reached the next rest area, dawn was bleeding into the sky. I pulled in shaking, parked under bright lights, and sat there until the sun was fully up. I checked the sleeper again. Empty. I checked the outside of the truck. No footprints, no marks. Nothing to prove what happened. I finished the run, but I avoided that stretch afterward. Told dispatch I'd take longer routes. They didn't argue. Sometimes, late at night, when the CB goes quiet for a second too long, I still hear my call sign drawn out slow in my head. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the cab, I feel warm breath on my neck and wonder if something followed me out of those mountains, waiting for the next time the road goes silent. I remember that night clearer than any I've lived through. The kind of clarity that doesn't come with comfort, just the sharp edge of memory pressing into you like ice against bare skin. The storm had hit Roanoke Ridge with everything it had, leaving the mountains cloaked in a thick, unbroken blanket of snow. Visibility was nearly nothing, and the kind of quiet that comes after a storm had settled over the forest. It wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. I was driving alone, headlights slicing through the blizzard like two weak swords, making the road ahead look longer and lonelier than it already was. My truck's heater was working overtime, but the warmth didn't reach past the windows. The storm outside seemed to seep into my bones. I'd left later than I should have. The snow had turned roads I knew well into strange, slippery paths, and I was the first vehicle on Roanoke Ridge since the storm hit. That stretch of highway winds through dense pines that bend low, their branches heavy with snow, and you feel like you're being watched, even when you know no one's there. The isolation gets under your skin. Somewhere between mile markers 23 and 25, I saw it. A pickup parked on the side of the road. Lights on, engine idling. My first thought was someone stranded, maybe hurt, maybe scared. Relief mixed with worry, because seeing another human in the mountains at night is almost a comfort, even if it's a stranger. I slowed, heart thudding louder than the storm against my truck. The snow was still blowing hard, swirling like mist in my headlights, and I could barely make out the shape of the pickup through the white haze. My instincts told me to stop, to check on whoever was in there. I parked a few feet behind it, letting my emergency lights flash, and grabbed my flashlight, my gloved hands trembling more than I liked. As I approached, the snow crunched under my boots. The pickup looked normal, old, beaten up, nothing remarkable. But there was no one inside, no sign of life, no footprints leading to or from the cab, except the truck's own tires cutting through the snow. I leaned in slowly, flashlight sweeping across the interior, looking for some sign of the driver. Maybe they had collapsed. Maybe they were unconscious. Maybe this was some roadside emergency. And then the radio, the CB radio that sat between the seats, blared a voice. A clear, low, urgent voice, shouting, "Don't open it." My first reaction was pure shock. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the snowbank. My breath was loud in my ears, mixing with the static from the CB, and I froze, trying to process what I just heard. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't any memory I could claim. It carried a strange timbre, almost familiar, like hearing an echo of someone I should have known but didn't. I spun around, expecting to see someone hiding in the trees, some person watching me, maybe even laughing at my nerves. But there was nothing. just the storm, still tossing snow like it had a mind of its own, and the dark pines looming over the road. When I looked back at the truck, my stomach dropped. It was gone. Just like that. No lights, no engine idling, no tires cutting through the snow. The road ahead was empty, and behind me, the mountains were silent except for the wind rattling through the trees. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold the flashlight steady, and I swear I felt my heart beat in my throat. I looked around, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, that the storm, the isolation, my nerves had played tricks on me. But then I heard it again, faint this time, through the static of my CB mic. The same voice. I jumped into my truck, started the engine, and pressed the accelerator down the ridge as fast as the snow would allow. I kept the CB radio off for a while, but eventually, curiosity or madness got the better of me. Late at night, when everything is quiet and the wind rattles the old windows, the voice comes back sometimes. Not words this time, just that tone, low and urgent, almost pleading. It makes my skin crawl because it's like a memory that isn't mine, like a warning I can't ignore. The thing is, I still can't explain what I saw or what I heard. And I've driven Roanoke Ridge hundreds of times since that night, during storms and clear skies alike, and I've never seen anything like it again. I've thought about it constantly, wondering if it was a trick of the storm, a hallucination brought on by isolation and fear, but something about that voice feels anchored. It feels real, more real than anything else I've ever experienced. The forest has a way of doing that to you, especially when you're alone and the storm has taken everything familiar from sight. The pines loom like silent watchers, and the wind sounds almost like speech if you listen too hard. Sometimes I drive the same stretch just to test myself, and I still feel the chill of that night, the way the snow and wind wrapped around me and made the world feel thinner, closer, more alive than it should have been. I can't explain why the truck disappeared. I can't explain why that voice spoke through my CB. I've asked locals, of course, folks who've lived on the ridge their whole lives, and they tell me the same thing. Strange things happen after heavy snowstorms. People vanish. Trucks appear, vanish, reappear. Some even claim they've heard voices on radios that weren't theirs, warnings they couldn't ignore. Most dismiss it, call it legends, call it superstition, but there's a thread of truth in those warnings that's hard to ignore. My own experience sits squarely in that truth, and every winter when snow begins to fall, I feel it again. That rush of unease, the weight of being watched, the instinct to stop. But the memory of that voice telling me not to open it keeps me moving. I've told myself it was a trick of perception or the storm or pure luck that I survived whatever it was. But my sleep is often haunted by the memory of that empty cab, the way the snow pressed against the headlights, the sudden, unexplainable clarity of a voice that didn't belong to me. And the thing is, I never felt threatened in the traditional sense. No claws, no growls, no chase. Just that absolute, unshakable sense that something beyond my understanding was there, watching, and that opening the door would have been a mistake. Months after the storm, I went back during the day, hoping to retrace my steps, maybe find some clue. Nothing. The ridge was empty, the snow melted, the road just a ribbon through the trees. No sign of the pickup, no tracks, nothing but the smell of pine and cold air. I tried to rationalize it, to ground myself in reason. Maybe someone had moved the truck. Maybe I had misheard the radio. But deep down, I know that night was different. There was a warning I wasn't supposed to ignore, and the universe, or whatever sits in the folds of Roanoke Ridge, made sure I didn't. Now, years later, I drive that road less often, The ridge doesn't scare me in the typical sense, but there's a weight there, a lingering presence that makes the hair on my arm stand. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint static of a CB, and the voice cuts through just long enough to make me remember. It doesn't say anything new, just repeats itself in that low, pleading tone. Don't open it. I can't explain why it's still there, why it found me again after all these years, or what would have happened if I hadn't listened. But I know this. The ridge has its own memory, its own sense of warning, and it keeps secrets it doesn't intend to share. I've tried to tell friends, to explain it, but most laugh it off. They've never been alone on Roanoke Ridge in a snowstorm, with nothing around but wind, trees, and the creeping silence that presses in until it feels like it's a part of you. Until you hear a voice that isn't yours coming through your radio, telling you not to open something you can't see. That's a fear you don't get over. It lingers. It waits. And I know that some nights when the world is quiet and the wind is high, it's still there, somewhere on that ridge, watching, whispering, keeping secrets. I don't know if I'll ever understand it, and I don't think I want to. Some things are meant to be left alone. Some warnings are meant to be heeded without question. And if there's one truth I carry from that night, it's this. Roanoke Ridge has its own rules, and some doors are never meant to be opened. I remember the fog that night like it was a living thing, curling around the edges of the road and pressing down on my chest. I was driving through the stretch near the North Carolina line, that long, lonely ribbon of asphalt that no one ever warns you about. The kind of road where the trees crowd in close, and even in summer, the chill seeps through the car's heater. I wasn't lost yet. At least, I didn't think I was. The GPS on my dashboard flickered on and off, like it couldn't decide where I was supposed to be. I remember glancing down at it and seeing coordinates that led straight into the forest, thick and dark beyond the fog. I told myself it was a glitch, but the feeling in my chest tightened anyway, that low, crawling dread you get when you know you're being watched by something you can't see. It started with the mile markers. I passed one, 47, and thought nothing of it. The fog made everything look the same, the road curling in loops through the trees, headlights catching on wet leaves. But then the next marker came into view, and it read 47 again. I blinked, glanced at the rearview mirror, and even checked my odometer. There was no way it could be the same number. The road behind me stretched endlessly, but every time I turned to look, the mist swallowed it up. I tried to convince myself I was tired, that my brain was playing tricks. But then, mile marker 47 appeared again, only a few minutes later. The fog pressed in harder, damp on the windshield, muting the world outside my car into a gray, whispering silence. I slowed, gripping the wheel, trying to take note of the surroundings. Nothing changed. No junctions, no driveways, no side roads. The trees were just trees, gnarled and wet with fog, standing like silent sentinels. I felt the cold creep up my spine and whisper along the back of my neck. My hands were sweating despite the chill, my breaths short and loud in the car. I thought about stopping, about getting out, but the road seemed endless, and the fog wasn't just around the car anymore. It was inside it, in the air, in my ears. I swear I could hear something moving in the branches, not the wind, but something that wasn't quite animal. Every time I tried to turn around, to go back the way I came, the fog thickened. It came down in rolling sheets, soft and heavy, clinging to the tires and hood like a living thing. The road ahead and behind me blurred, and I felt my stomach twist in a way I hadn't felt in years. My headlights barely penetrated the mist, and when I glanced at the dashboard, the mile marker number was still 47. I whispered it aloud. 47. And the echo sounded wrong, like my voice bounced off invisible walls. There was no one there to hear it, but I felt as if something had, that something in the trees had acknowledged me. I tried talking myself down, tried to find some rational explanation. Maybe I'd looped around an old back road, a private road that kept the eye markers the same, a section of highway I didn't know existed. But the GPS wouldn't cooperate. It blinked in and out like a dying eye, coordinates leading straight into the forest, into nothing but trees and mist. I remember gripping the wheel until my knuckles hurt, turning it sharply at a couple of places, hoping to find an exit or even a sign of life. A house, a truck, another car, anything. But each time I turned, the fog thickened, the number stayed the same, and a quiet panic began to build in my chest, a pressure that I couldn't shake. At some point, I stopped trying to fight it. I slowed to a crawl, headlights cutting only a few feet ahead, fog dripping off the mirrors. I remember staring at a mile marker 47 as if it could offer me answers, tracing the flaking paint with my eyes, counting the numbers over and over. I think I started muttering to myself, asking it to change, to give me a sign, something. And I swear, just for a moment, the fog seemed to pulse, thickening and pulling closer to the car, the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves heavy in my nose. I shut my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, the mile marker was still there. The hours passed like minutes, or maybe minutes like hours. I couldn't tell. There was no moon, no stars, just the gray soup of fog pressing against my windshield. I thought about turning off the road entirely, driving into the shoulder, but even the shoulder disappeared into the mist. It wasn't just the fog that was unnatural. It was the stillness. No insects, no birds, no wind moving the branches. I had the sudden, gut-twisting sense that I was alone, completely alone, in a part of the world that shouldn't exist. Sleep began to gnaw at me, but I was too aware to doze. The fog had a texture, almost a weight on the chest. And there was a sound now, faint but unmistakable. The snapping of branches, soft and deliberate, not like the wind. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a deer, maybe some raccoon. But the sound kept moving, circling the car, following. It wasn't consistent with the road either, moving parallel and then vanishing. My foot hovered over the brake and gas, ready to flee in either direction. Every instinct screamed to drive forward, to leave this stretch behind, but the road seemed to fold in on itself. Dawn came like a promise I wasn't sure I deserved. The fog thinned slowly, peeling away in translucent sheets. I remember the first glimmer of light burning my eyes, washing over the trees and the road. And then, the mile marker changed. 48, maybe 49, I can't remember exactly. What I do remember is that the trees opened up into a stretch of road I didn't recognize. Not the North Carolina line, not anywhere I'd been before. My odometer and GPS were still broken, coordinates blinking like a broken compass. I was somewhere completely unfamiliar, a place that seemed real but wrong, like a memory I had no recollection of living. I pulled over finally, hands shaking, and sat in the car listening to the forest. Birds were singing now, leaves rustling, but the dread didn't leave. It had settled into my bones. I thought about leaving the car and walking, trying to find a familiar road, but something in the woods stopped me. A faint, wet crunching noise, not loud, just enough to remind me I wasn't entirely alone. Something had been following me, I realized then, watching from the shadows the whole time, patient, waiting for me to notice. I drove on eventually, trying to make sense of it, but I never found a recognizable sign again until I hit a highway exit that led to a small town miles away. When I finally checked my phone, the GPS was working again, maps appearing where none had been. It showed the road I'd just passed, but the stretch I had driven through wasn't on it. It didn't exist. Locals I asked later had never heard of it, had never seen the mile markers I described. Some smiled politely and shook their heads, dismissing me. Others got quiet, their eyes flicking toward the woods. I could tell they'd heard stories, but they weren't willing to tell me. I haven't driven that way since. I avoid the fog if I can, avoid long stretches of isolated highway. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself staring at mile markers in my dreams, the same number repeating, the fog pressing against the car, and that creeping chill rising up my spine. I can still feel it, that endless road folding in on itself, a place that exists outside time, outside logic, a place that waits for you when you're alone, that tests you and watches, patient and silent. Even now, years later, when I drive past a stretch of forest or see fog rolling in over the hills, I get that same feeling. A hollow in my chest, a subtle panic in my stomach, because I know it's out there, somewhere, the stretch of road that doesn't obey the world's rules. And I know deep down, if I ever end up there again, mile marker 47 will be waiting, and the forest will be watching. It doesn't matter how far I drive, how well lit the road is, or how many other cars pass by. That fog, that number, that quiet, patient dread, it has a way of finding you. And when it does, there's nothing left but the waiting, and the silence, and the knowledge that you are truly, utterly alone.